Hi everyone and welcome to my updated rapid fire guide for season 5. Rapid fire has been one of the best builds back in season 4 and now again it remains a powerhouse of a build and got even better. We put it back in S tier in season 5. It's looking to be like one of the best builds in the game in terms of damage output and hit pushing potential. It has insanely large burst damage with those 3 call point rapid fire nukes that shoot like 20 arrows. And it got a bunch of new tools to play with in season 5. So I want to go and show you what it's all about so that it can be best prepared for season 5. Now, I do want to mention you can also play pretty similar setups with, for example, Barrage or even Penshot. They kind of have all of the same synergies, so you can make some small adjustments from this planner or from this build and then play one of the other ranged core skills if you want. This is also not the only way to play ranged core skills. You don't have to go for the cold imbuement precision combos. There is also a way to, for example, play with poison imbuement, but this is a bit of a different setup. You have to build it very differently, and I will cover this separately. So with that being said, let's go into it and see what it's all about. In season 4, I think the highest rapid fire clears in the pit are something like tier 140 or something. It is very high, and we expect to go even beyond 150 in season 5. And this is thanks to some of the reworked uniques that make this setup even stronger. First of all, we got a new one, the Umbra Crux. It's a very powerful item because it allows you to spawn this shade totem that it can hit. And then whenever you hit that, it will replicate the damage it takes to enemies around it. So in fact, you can, for example, just have 2 targets at a boss fight. And then you can also get extra lucky hit effects, these kind of things. But also, if you hit that very fast, you actually deal more damage to it. Right now, we're not 100% sure if this is something that Blizzard has fixed. At least this is how it worked on the PTR. And we assume that this will be the same when the patch goes live. So when you have this dagger, you put down the totem with, for example, a smoke grenade, and then you shoot at the boss and the totem at the same time, hitting both, and then getting a lot of extra damage. So this is one of the reasons why it has become so much stronger. And we also have the reworked Sky Hunter. So here on the right, you can see the new Sky Hunter. It is an insanely powerful item because, first of all, rapid fire doesn't really have any good power to put on a two-handed weapon. Usually has something like Edge Masters or so for like a 40% buff, which is rather weak for a two-handed power. So you get more damage from the Sky Hunter power itself, and you can put the Edge Masters on another slot. And it has insanely good stats. It has everything you want: attack speed, lots of crit damage that we need for the synergy with some precision key passive, and then chance on marksman projectiles to cast twice, and a bit of movement speed as well that you get on top. So it's like an overall insanely good package, and it also solves any kind of energy issues you could ever have. In fact, if you want, you can also play a Sky Hunter inner sight build, for example, with precision and just kind of like fire away and never run out of energy as well. This will be a bit weaker than something like a common point version that I'm describing here, but it is also an option. Another thing that elevates the rogues is also the reworked passives. So we have the Call of the Nameless that actually has a bunch of these, and I'm going to show them what they do here. So this is this cluster of passives. This used to be concussive, now it's unstable elixirs that gives you a damage buff for 10 seconds after using a health potion. So you kind of want to weave in health potion into your damage rotation, especially against elite fights or in staggered bosses or something. You press the potion, so at some point you're going to get the muscle memory and just do it. And then you have a pretty huge 6% damage per point here. So this is a really strong reason why rogues have gotten a bit better. And then there's Trig Attacks, which is even crazier. So Trig Attacks gives you, with only 3 ranks, up to 36% crit chance and then 36% crit damage. It's pretty wild. And not only that, but this also double dips with precision. So precision scales off your critical strike damage. And in fact, it scales off your critical strike damage in the character details. So the Trig Attacks will improve that value, giving you this multiplier, and then precision scales off that higher multiplier again. So you have some insane value here with Trig Attacks for precision builds. In fact, you get basically like 100% crit chance pretty easily, or at least close to it. And then you get this insane amount of extra crit damage. And this is the reason why we have Call of the Nameless in the setup, which also has ranks to Trig Attacks. With just a normal roll, that is like a 2 roll, and then 1 master crit, you can get to 3 ranks. And with a greater affix, you can even get all the way to 5 extra ranks of Trig Attacks. So this is really what you're looking for here on this item. Everything else is kind of irrelevant, but the crowd control duration is kind of nice to have because it also allows you, for example, to stagger bosses faster, so you get more of those burst phases. Usually you try to take down bosses while they are staggered, and this helps with that as well. So this is an insanely powerful item, even better than the Shaco or Endarios or something like that. However, you don't necessarily just have to go for the Car of the Nameless. You can go for the other helmets as well. They are good. There's also the Crown of Lucion, a new helm that was introduced. That gives you lots of extra damage when you spend resources, but you have to kind of keep up the buff and keep it rolling, which is not always easy to do on a common point build. So you have a few options here, but I think Car of the Nameless for most purposes will definitely be the strongest. Just one thing to remember, because trigger attacks only works when you actually stun or daze enemies, this will usually not be up in most boss fights unless they have adds. So when adds spawn, you try to trigger this and then do a lot more damage. And when you have boss fights that don't have any adds, you will actually feel a bit of a difference here. So this is something to be aware of. And last but not least, we have the condemnation. So this is also updated to now be basically auto-include in any common point build. It has lots of basic attack speed. It's basically like a rapid aspect for free. A bunch of dex here, a bunch of damage per common point spent, which is nice. Chance to make enemies vulnerable, which is helpful since we don't really have a guaranteed way of making enemies vulnerable. We rely on this, plus the cold imbuement that also has a chance to make enemies vulnerable. And like this, we basically have it up all the time. And then it has this effect here where you deal 40% extra damage when you spend free common points. And you also have a 50% chance to generate free common points when you use basic skills with this weapon. Now for this, you would have to run puncture, and this build actually doesn't run puncture, but you could consider it once you have really good gear. So for now, for this planner, I actually put Heartseeker, but it is totally fine to go puncture as well. And then you could benefit from this condemnation effect and play a 2-to-1 cycle instead of a 3-to-1 cycle. So you can make the cycle shorter and still get free common points pretty reliably and get your precision stacks pretty reliably. Usually you want to do 3 shots, giving you those precision stacks, then you get the guaranteed crit and this massive damage bonus for your rapid fire. But with high enough crit chance and puncture giving you 3 chances to get a crit on each of those attacks, you can actually get to the point where just 2 punctures is enough to give you the precision stacks, and 2 punctures is also a relatively high chance to give you 3 common points. And sometimes you have only 2, but most of the time you have 3. So you get all of the benefits that you would otherwise get anyway. So you can do faster cycles, but this is something for like the more higher end setups, I would say, where you have a bunch of crit chance already, where you have the Sky Hunter with the chance to cast twice for marksman projectiles, masterworked up a little bit. At that point, you can consider going puncture and then do some slight tweaks on your setup. And you can do this 2-to-1 cycle with condemnation. For the start though, I would recommend Heartseeker, which is also very nice because it actually adds extra crit chance to the enemies. It also has the extra attack speed bonus, so your rapid fire animations will be faster and you will kind of get close to what puncture does in general as well. And you also have Fundamental Heartseeker, which gives you a 15% extra crit damage buff against the target. So especially against boss fights, this is really nice. So this is generally a way more powerful buff tool than puncture is. But you can't benefit from this condemnation extra common point effect. So either way works, especially on the higher end. I think puncture might actually win because you can do reliable 2-to-1 cycles, have way faster rotations. But again, you'll also, for example, run out of cold imbuement charges more easily. So there are certain problems you have to solve first before you can do something like that with the condemnation. Either way though, this item goes into the setup as soon as you get it. Just this 40% damage buff alone is already really good, and the basic attack speed buff. And it just has like a relatively good stat line. So you want to include this. And this actually leaves our setup with 3 unique weapons. Look at that. We have Sky Hunter, Umbra Crux, and Condemnation. No weapon tempers whatsoever, because the chance to cast marksman projectiles twice, which by the way also helps you with Heartseeker, for example, to stack those buffs faster, it helps with the puncture and so on. So this is just really nice to have as an extra bonus here. But you can actually get to over 100% chance to cast twice just from the Sky Hunter. So this is kind of the target here. You try to get one maybe eventually that has a greater affix here, try to masterwork it, and then you can get to 100, or like, for example, a greater affix and like 1 masterwork crit, I think is 99%. So that's totally fine. And then you can, also put some masterwork crits on the other stats here. So Sky Hunter, really powerful. You want to get this, and then you want to have Condemnation, Call of the Nameless, and the new Umbra Crux that you get from the Infernal Hordes. So these are the main uniques that you're looking for. And of course, the Scoundrel's Kiss, which kind of enables this entire build. So Scoundrel's Kiss drops from Lord Zir, and I would not recommend to play Rapid Fire until you have at least this item. This is kind of the enabler. This makes it so that Rapid Fire shoots these AoE shots here. You can see like these explosions. This is kind of like the big enabler here. So you want to get these Scoundrel's Kiss first, and then all of the other uniques, kind of like you can build them up as you go. But this is what you should have before you start. Before this, I would recommend, for example, play Barrage. As I mentioned at the start, you can play Barrage with a very similar setup and not any uniques. So this is a very good leveling build, and eventually you can transition to the rapid fire setup once you have Scoundrel's Kiss. So now let's get into the rest of the setup and talk about the remaining aspects and the paragons and the skill tree. So here we have one of the new aspects called the cold clip aspect. This is very powerful, and you might be wondering, why is this included? We don't really care about our basic attacks being cold imbued. Well, it's mostly for the second part of this aspect, where you deal increased damage to chilled and frozen enemies. In fact, this tooltip is outdated. It's actually 35% extra damage. And with cold imbue, after the first arrow of rapid fire, the enemies will be chilled, or if you hit them with your Heartseeker, for example, and then you get this extra bonus. This also works against staggered bosses, is very powerful. Another good aspect we have here is expectant, because we get up to 30% extra damage when we do 3 attacks, so this also naturally synergizes with the combo point playstyle. We have retribution here on the neck. The main reason why this is on the neck is because it double dips on staggered bosses as well. So there's no indication that this has been fixed from season 4, which means you get 2 times 45% damage multiplier once the stagger occurs. This also means that in general we have a lot of these extra conditional damage effects against stunned, frozen, and so on enemies. And when you fight bosses, most of the time you will not have them until you stagger them. So you want to try to include a lot of crowd control effects. For example, here we have chance to slow, we have chance to stun, we have chance to daze, and also, for example, the chill and the freeze that can happen from the cold imbue. So you want to try to stack up multiple different crowd control effects so you can stagger bosses quickly. And then together with the Call of the Nameless, as I mentioned, we have this extra crowd control duration. This also improves the stagger values. So you can stagger bosses in seconds, at least the first time around, and then it gets slower and slower the more staggers you do, up to I think 4 times staggers, where bosses get 90% crowd control resistance. So it takes quite a long time after the 3rd and 4th staggers to actually get the stagger again. However, you can still do it, slowly over time, if you go for like a really high-end pit push, for example. But generally you're trying to stay at a level where you can kill bosses in 1, maybe 2 stagger phases or so. So this should be something like a half-minute fight, and this is kind of the sweet spot of what you're looking for. Now at the start you might not actually have all these uniques available to you. So you see here there's a lot of these unique weapons and also the Scoundrel's Kiss. You should have at least the ring, as I mentioned, but you can get away with Wild Coronation, Amber Crux, and even a Sky Hunter, and then you can include some other legendary powers. So some that I would recommend here that would also fit in is Edge Masters. So this is something you could, for example, put on one of your normal weapons or even the 2-handed weapons. That's okay. Rapid gives you the extra attack speed. So this just kind of like is the coordination effect with lots of basic attack speed. But later on, once you have that, you want to replace rapid. But for now, for the start, you can go with that. There is the repeating aspect. You might be wondering why this is not in the setup. It doesn't really work well with the Scoundrel's Kiss. So this just fires a regular arrow that would potentially give you a little bit more AoE damage, but it doesn't have this explosion effect that the Scoundrel's Kiss has. So most of the damage just comes from those basically mortars that you shoot, and this ricochet effect is actually not really good once you have Scoundrel's Kiss, so we forget about this one. Another power you could throw in there is Inner Calm, for example. It's just, extra damage, and then sometimes when you stand still, for example on boss fights when they're staggered, you can get a triple bonus. There's also something that you can throw in here on one of these weapons before you get the uniques. On the defensive side, we have the Umbers aspect. So this is crucial to any rogue build. You always want to have Umbers for the Dark Shroud generation. You see here there is no Dark Shroud on our bar, but Dark Shroud is the #1 survivability tools for rogue. It gives you, in this case, roughly 50% damage reduction when you have 5 Dark Shrouds. You will basically always have 5 or at least 4 Dark Shrouds. If you have extra ranks to this, for example here from just a normal chest, you can get Subterfuge ranks, you can get Dark Shroud ranks, and you can get this way higher. With a Shaco even way higher. You can get all the way up to like 70% damage reduction or so. This is a lot. And you usually have 5 of these. There is a new change in Season 5 that Dark Shrouds only disappear maximum once every 1.5 seconds, even if you take many hits. So you will easily just kind of get it back instantly up to 5, and then it drops down to 4, and it goes up to 5, and so on. So we don't have this problem that we suddenly lose all of our damage reduction if we take multiple hits. It kind of disappears very slowly, and it can easily outpace that. It also has extra movement speed here. It also has the extra crit. If you want to be a bit more defensive, for example, there's also the extra heal. Whenever you get hit, you instantly heal up for 10%. It's also not bad to have if you want that. So this is where Umbers comes in. So you want to try to get this aspect early on. This gives you a lot of the defense, and then you go into the Dark Shroud. We also have the Frostbitten aspect here. Is basically an offensive power on the boots. So you can go for these kind of boots. You could also go for something like Pains and Griefs. They have been buffed. So that also works. It has kind of like a similar effect here. But since we are always critting, we don't care about the stun grenade effect and these kind of things. We care about this extra crit damage effect here. We always freeze enemies, we always stun enemies, and we always crit. So we get a lot of extra value here. And then we also have, for example, Might aspect early on, at least. You can throw this in. There's Carlton nameless that I have here. So before you get this one, you can also go for a third defensive power, something like Protecting or Protector or Assimilation, if you want to get some Fortify. So there are some options here. Or even a utility power. Or, for example, you could move Frostbitten to the helm early on, and then maybe have a mobility power here, like Ravagers for the double Shadow Step, or it's just Ghostwalker for extra speed or something like that. Now, for the rest of the skill tree, we have our Rapid Fire here. You want to try to invest 5 points into that, and then you see here we have 21 ranks, and the setup, you get a lot from the ring, and then on the gloves, you can get lots of extra ranks. So this really beefs up this power of the skill. It has this extra crit effect that we don't really care about, since you have 100% crit chance from precision, but we have Advanced Rapid Fire here. This gives you 30% extra damage after evading. So you want to try to weave in and evade in your damage rotation. So roughly every 3 combos you do, depending on your attack speed, usually you do like 1 evade, and then 1, 2, 3 shoot rapid fire, 1, 2, 3 rapid fire, 1, 2, 3 rapid fire, evade, and so on. So like this, you always get this effect. So try to activate this, for example, in the stagger phases on the boss at least once or so. This is very powerful damage bonus. We have Sturdy and Siphoning Strikes. We get damage reduction and healing. A bit of Stutter Step. At least early on, this is kind of nice. Later, you won't actually need this. So at some point, we take out these 2 points, put them somewhere else here to just squeeze out a bit more damage or so. But early on, this just helps you to reach the movement speed cap. Here's the Caltrops. This is mostly also for the bosses. It is for activating the Deadly Ambush effect. We have this on the Paragons here. There is this legendary note. So this is the main reason to run Caltrops. And Caltrops also gives us a damage buff. So kind of similar, especially on bosses. You want to throw down those Caltrops. You have the enhanced upgrade here that gives it a stacking damage buff. In Season 4, this used to stack kind of infinitely if you had extra Caltrops duration on your weapons anymore. But now this is not the case anymore. So that we can easily go with all these unique weapons here. We don't need Caltrops duration. This caps out at 45% now. You can actually refresh this buff. So when you throw down Caltrops, let it last for like 6 seconds on the ground. You can throw another Caltrops and it will carry over this damage buff you have already stacked up. So if you can keep the boss inside the Caltrops and then stagger it, you get a lot of value out of this. On normal elite packs, usually you should need this, so this is pretty much exclusively for bosses. There's also here the chill, so that we get a bit more stagger value. So this is kind of helpful. Here we have unstable elixirs. I talked about this, trigger attacks. Dash also has been upgraded. It now gives you a 10% crit chance, helps you a little bit with precision stacking. And we have Methodical Dash with +1 charge and -3 seconds cooldown. Very nice. So you have very fast dashes, even with just 1 rank here and no cooldown on our gear. We can get down to like 6 seconds cooldown. So very cool. Then we have the Dark Shroud. I mentioned that. We have the Smoke Grenade here. If you have Subterfuge ranks, you can actually get a pretty low cooldown. But it is fine even without the Subterfuge ranks. If you get Dark Shroud ranks, or for example here we have Materials Might in the Uber setup, this makes you incredibly tanky, and you can get away with just 5 points here in Smoke Grenade, 10.66 seconds cooldown baseline, and you get -5 seconds with this countering Smoke Grenade upgrade when you throw it at a boss or an elite. So usually you want to try to just go in, diffuse the danger of an elite pack. You get extra damage here from the enhanced Smoke Grenade, and it also spawns the Totem from Umber Crux. So you want to try to throw this in the pack and then start shooting, and you get all of these benefits all at once here. So that's very good. We have some damage passives here. Exploit Malice. We have the Cold Imbue. You just need 1 point. You don't really care about investing more. And we get the chance to make vulnerable, and we get the extra 40% damage against frozen enemies. Since we freeze very easily, both with the Cold Imbue and then, maybe like a chance to freeze or so, you have this effect basically all the time. as long as monsters are not unstoppable or when bosses are not staggered. But this is kind of the main reason why we run this whole setup here. It's a 40% extra damage. And of course, on the Paragons, we have Eldritch Bounty that works at that. It's another 20% multiplier. So I get a lot of damage out of this. There's Rage of Finesse. We pick that up as pretty much any rogue build. Again, Frozen Synergy. It's like the strongest passive on the entire tree. Here comes Innovation. We don't really care about it. It's just from the Umber Crux. So we don't really have enough resources anyway. And we don't really pick up anything else here, as you can see. And then we have Precision. So this is our key passive. So as I mentioned, there's like a few small tweaks here. So for example, we take out Rugged and Stutter Step here, and we distribute those points in mostly the Smoke Grenade. So I see here, for example, early on when you have a normal chest for the Subterfuge ranks, we have 8 ranks here, so just 1 invested and then +7. And here later on, to kind of make sure you have a short enough cooldown with the Smoke Grenade, we put those points here. We're going to be tanky enough once we have Tyrio's Might. This is like an incredible defensive buff, way better even than these Dark Shroud ranks could be, which is saying something. Dark Shroud ranks are really valuable on rogues, and Tyrio's Might just kind of blows that away. But you don't have to go for Tyrio's Might. You can get away with a normal chest as well. This is fine if you want to do it that way, or if you don't want to go for the mythic items, or you just get unlucky. This is okay, but again, you can do a bit of tweaking here once you have that. I also want to mention the no Caltrops version for people that really don't like to play with the Caltrops. Technically, you could go for the Poison Trap to also activate your Deadly Ambush Paragon node, so this kind of has the same synergy. You get the Poison Trap ticks on a boss, for example, or on a lead pack, and you get a Deadly Ambush all the time. So that is another option if you don't want to do this jumping around. But if you just want to kind of go fast, here you replace it with Shadow Step. So for like a more speed farming variant, for example, where you don't need to squeeze out every single bit of damage, I actually did a bit of an adjustment here on the Paragon boards. So you see here, we replaced the Deadly Ambush board with the Tricks of the Trade board, which also has a 25% damage buff. Every time you use the dash, for example, or the Shadow Step, you get this buff instead. And yeah, I kind of moved up a few things around here to make sure that we still have like a decent Paragon board. So if you want to not play with the Caltrops and kind of want to go fast instead, you can play this version. Otherwise, you have this here for the highest damage output. And while we are on the Paragon boards, it looks like this. So we have 7 board set up. There's a lot of legendary Paragon nodes that we want to pick up here on a rogue. There's a lot of valuable stuff. Exploit Weakness gives you a stacking damage buff when you hit vulnerable enemies. We have Deadly Ambush here with the extra 22% damage. We have Cheap Shot again for crowd controlled enemies. We get extra damage, and for staggered bosses, Eldritch Bounty is another 20% multiplier. And then in some cases here also the Tricks of the Trade with the 25%. So there's a lot of really valuable stuff and also a lot of really good glyphs. We got Kenny here for the non-physical damage stacking effect. You got Control, since we free stuff all the time. You have this 20% damage buff. You got Fluidity. We don't really care about the energy regeneration, but there are really good magic nodes here that give us the extra life, as you can see. And then also the 10% extra damage after using agility skill, in this case, dash or Caltrops. Here's also Cunning Stratagem. I forgot to mention that one. This gives you extra arrows for your rapid fire, and it says plus 33% of the non-damage combo point effect. So the combo point effect of rapid fire is plus 1 arrow per combo point, and you see here it goes from 5 to 6 with 1 combo point, then 7, and then it says 9, which is usually 8. So this is the 33% bonus. You get 3 arrows extra plus 33%. And in fact, this is buggy and gives you 2 extra arrows. So this says 9, but it's actually 10. So you go from 8 to 10, which is pretty valuable. So we pick up the Cunning Stratagem here for the 25% extra damage upgrade, basically. Pretty valuable. Yeah, some other glyphs here. We have Ranger Glyph. I talked earlier about the Condemnation and potentially running Puncture. The main reason to use Ranger Glyph is because we have Heartseeker, which is where we always have our bow in hand and we get this 10% damage reduction. If you use Puncture, then you most of the time actually do not get this 10% damage reduction, and the Ranger Glyph loses a lot of value. So if you go for Puncture, you have to kind of move this around and put another glyph here. You could put, for example, something like Turf here. You still get a bit of a damage reduction effect. For example, with Puncture, you're generally probably going to be a bit closer to enemies anyway, so you can just do Turf, for example. This is like a good replacement. There's also Exploit if you want to make stuff vulnerable instantly. There's Diminish. So there's a few options here instead of Ranger that also give you maybe some defensive benefits or even some offensive there, or even Chip if you really want. You can actually trigger these 10% extra damage taken with just puncturing enemies, for example. So there are some options there for different glyphs that you can put here if you don't run Heartseeker. just keep that in mind that you have to change this if you do that. And lastly, let's talk about the stat priorities a little bit. So a few things you have seen already. You want obviously rapid fire ranks. We obviously want a lot of crit damage because this scales our key passive precision. Crit damage is way more valuable than anything else. You want to temper this on every slot you can. So this goes on the gloves. If you don't have unique weapons yet, and you put this on all of your weapons as well, you put it on a ring, on the amulet. You want the cold imbue extra casts. You see this here, we have +4 and +3. This gives you a total of 9 cold imbue casts. It has a 13 seconds cooldown. So you get roughly 1 rapid fire per 1.5 seconds. That is cold imbued. So it's relatively easy to keep it up permanently once you have 2 of those tempers, a little bit master worked up, and you're going to be okay. And potentially, if you go for like this 2-to-1 cycle with puncture, you might want to masterwork this up slightly more to maybe get to like 10 or 11 charges or something like that, because its cycle is going to be a bit faster. But just try to make sure that you always have your cold imbue up, basically. And other than that, yeah, we want a bit of dex, armor. You want to hit the armor cap of 9,230. You want to hit the resistance cap, of course. Right now, this shows kind of low values because we don't have the updated Tyrus Might yet. But in Season 5, this thing has like infinite all res, basically. So this kind of covers all of your res. In the normal version, you see here we have 70 everywhere, so you can get this done with just 2 rolls. So we have like a lightning roll here, for example. Actually, I think there's only 1 roll. Now here's 1 on the boots. Okay, so 1 lightning, 1 shadow, for example, and then the rest comes from the gems here, and the rest is some paragons. There are a few resistances nodes here that help you out to get this to 70. And on your amulet, you want to get a bunch of passives. So Frigid Finesse is very powerful, and then Weapon Mastery is good, Unstable Elixirs is good. If trick attacks exists, which I think it will not exist, but it might, then you also want to put trick attacks here. Otherwise, there's also a bunch of other good passes. So anything that we have on a tree, basically, there's Exploit, Malice, you know, all these passives here, they're all okay to have on the neck. Also, something like movement speed is fine, something like cooldown is fine. So, of course, it's very hard to get a triple passive amulet. Try to get what you can, basically, and focus on Frigid Finesse. And that is pretty much about it. Maybe a little bit of attack speed here, a little bit of movement speed here on the boots. So this is kind of what your items should look like. And our gem is going to be emeralds for the extra crit damage. And that also concludes this guide. So hope you enjoyed this. I wish you good luck in Season 5 with the Rapid Fire Rogue or whatever else you might be playing. It's going to be a pretty fun season. Rogues are looking really good. Rapid Fire in particular is going to burst down stuff like crazy. I think it's going to be very fun to play this build. So I'm looking forward to that. Hope you enjoyed this. Wish you good luck and see you guys next time.